Understanding World War II, Project Introduction. World War II. To really understand World War II, you have to understand the conflicting ideologies that were in play, as well as the massive devastation the war caused. In the photographs at the right, you can see examples of this. In the top left, the effects of the German bombing of London. In the top right, forces fighting in North Africa. In the bottom right, the damage to the Reichstag building in Berlin at the end of the war, and in the bottom left, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. To understand this on a more graphic scale, look at the following chart in terms of the military and civilian deaths that were caused by the war, and look at the deaths by country in addition to the pie chart that shows you the deaths divided out by side in total. World War II was caused in part by old problems: militarism, alliances, imperialism, and nationalism. With regard to militarism, Germany rearmed despite the fact that that was banned in the Treaty of Versailles. New alliances were made in the lead up to World War II, including the Axis alliance between Germany, Italy, and Japan. Germany also secretly made a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union just before the war started officially in 1939. This was an agreement for the two countries not to attack each other. Imperialism, left over from World War I, where colonies were not granted independence but just changed hands, like German holdings in China that were given to Japan. And then nationalism, countries who felt slighted by the Treaty of Versailles wanted revenge. There are also new problems, for example, totalitarianism. The desire for power and security led some nations that had been wrecked by World War I and the Worldwide Depression to turn to dictators who had total power and promised to lead them to greatness. Examples of totalitarian dictators on both sides in World War I or World War II would include Adolf Hitler in Germany and Joseph Stalin on the right of the Soviet Union. Fascism is also a problem that emerges prior to World War II. This is extreme militant nationalism. It puts the needs of the state or government over the freedoms of individuals. It features one-party rule, territorial expansion, the persecution of enemies, and the support of business leaders. In the picture at the right, you see Benito Mussolini in the center of the picture, surrounded by his fascist supporters. Racism is an element in World War II. The Nazi Party was a group of fascists whose belief in themselves as a superior race led to the persecution and extermination of Jews as well as other minorities in the conduct of World War II. At the right, you can see an example of the yellow star that French Jews were forced to wear after the German invasion. And in the bottom right, you can see a picture of a synagogue in Germany being burned in the year prior to the war, 1938. Finally, communism is a consideration during World War II, and that's so because the threat of German and Japanese victory in Asia and Europe was so great that free nations, democratic nations like Great Britain and the United States, fought with the Soviet Union as allies for the duration of the war, even though they were communist. Now, this relationship would turn sour very fast once the war ended, but for the duration of the war itself, the communist Soviets were allied with the democratic nations of the United States and Great Britain. Here you see Joseph Stalin pictured on the left, Franklin Roosevelt in the middle, and Winston Churchill on the right at the Conference of Tehran in 1943. Let's talk about some ways of studying the war. The war is so massive as a topic that we almost need categories in which to file things in. So we've got the war in Europe, which involves fighting against Germany and Italy. We've got the war in the Pacific, which involves fighting against Japan. We've got the Holocaust, which is the persecution of the Jews and the concentration and death camps. We've got the impact of the war on the home front, which basically means the ways that the war affected civilians. And then we've got the strategies and diplomacy of the war, decisions that were made about the conduct of the war on both sides, as well as conferences where leaders discussed what the post-war world should look like. When you have finished the guided notes for this video, you're going to complete the following chart using the links provided in the guided notes page. You want to take each year of the war from 1939 to 1945 and use the resources provided to identify 3 important events. And you're going to have a lot more than 3 events to choose from, so the events you choose are up to you. Pick things that are interesting for you. And then for each event that you choose, you're going to categorize it according to the area of study that we looked at on the previous slide. So for example, in 1939, Germany signed a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union. That's an example of diplomacy or strategy of the war. The second event is that Germany invaded Poland, which is an example of the war in Europe. And the third event, Polish Jews were ordered to wear yellow stars to identify them, and that's an event that's relative to the Holocaust. So 1939 is done for you, and your job for the remainder of class today is to use the resources to research the remaining years of the war, identifying the important events and placing them into categories. If you need to rewind or rewatch any part of this video, please feel free to do so, and thanks for listening.